Hey guys, how is it going? And welcome back to Cloud Engineering Projects. In this episode of Cloud Engineering Projects, we will be talking about authentication and authorization. And I will be showing you the architectural flow of how Azure handles authentication and authorization. We will also be talking about the different levels of authorization and the clarification of different layers of roles. So this topic might feel a little bit like theory, but it is not really a theoretical concept, as I will be drawing out how traffic flows in Azure from the perspective of authentication and authorization. We will together also draw the architectural diagram of IAM, which is Identity and Access Management. We will also go further to talk about Entra ID, roles, AD roles, and RBAC. And also, we will be talking about principal IDs, users, group, service principals, managed identities, and external identities. So all of these things are what we will be talking about in this episode of Cloud Engineering Project. So without wasting time, let's quickly get right in. So we will be starting from the highest concept of IAM, which is Identity and Access Management. So IAM, which is Identity and Access Management, is a broad concept that covers all systems and abstract processes that are related to identifying users and controlling their access. So when we're talking about authentication and authorization, what we are essentially doing is that we are talking about IAM, right? So everything that we will be doing inside of this tutorial will fall under the concept of IAM, which is Identity and Access Management. So how does it all happen? Let's get it started from the standpoint of having an Azure account, okay? So imagine this line that I have drawn here. This rectangular shape here is your Azure account. So when you sign into Azure, what happens is that there is something here at the entrance that handles the authentication and authorization, right? So when traffic is coming into your Azure, right, into your Azure account, it hits this guy here called Entra ID. So when the traffic hits this feature here called Entra ID, two things happen. One, there is authentication, right? And two, there is authorization. So remember, these two things happen in this order that I have written them. We have authentication and authorization. Authentication essentially is who you claim you are. So when you sign in, you get authenticated into Azure account. If you already have an account, authorization is what you can do when you have already signed in into your account. Okay, that is authorization, right? So when you are signed in into your account, right, what happens is that a token is generated under the hood for you. So if I come here, I have something here called token. So this token is what combines your authentication and authorization together to let Azure know what you can do within your Azure account. Okay, so this token follows you around wherever you go within your Azure account. The token, you can imagine it to be some random generated number, right? Some maybe alphanumeric character, something like that, right? But it doesn't really matter what the token is. But you have a token, right, that goes around with you inside of your Azure account. Okay. Now you've authenticated and you've been authorized into your Azure account, and that is what you see. Where immediately you go past this Entra ID here, this guy, yeah. Immediately you go past this guy here, right? You have access into your Azure account, and that is what you see here, right? So because I am logged in into my Azure account, I have been authenticated inside of this Azure account. So here we have quite a few roles that allow you to do management of your Azure tenancy. This is the place where you have your global admin role, right? This is where you have user admin role and many other rules here. Okay, so this allows you to manage your Azure tenancy. to grant permissions to people, to manage identities, and do quite a lot of different things, right? So you can manage users, you can manage groups, and quite a lot of other different things, right? So this is where you have these roles. So these roles that you have at this level are what is called AD roles. Okay, so you have your AD roles at this level, right? It's called AD roles because before this guy got changed to Entra ID, it was initially called AD, Azure AD, which is Azure Active Directory. Okay, so AD called Azure Active Directory. That is why we have it as AD roles here. But for some reasons, Microsoft changed this guy from AD, from Azure Active Directory, to Entra ID. Okay, so you have these roles here. You will soon understand why I specifically brought these roles here out. Okay, now what then happens after you've been authenticated into your account? Okay, so before I go into what then happens next after you've authenticated into your account, let me quickly show you these AD roles here. So if I come back here and I click on this, my browser here, and then I just come here to search for Entra ID. Okay, if I click into this Entra ID and then I come to roles and administrators, which you can see here, you will see the list of roles that you have in this scope immediately when you log in into your Azure account. Okay, so when you come back here, you can see password administrator. So if you want to manage people's password, this is the role that you will grant onto your own account, that you'll be able to manage people's password. If I scroll down, let me go back, or you'll be able to see global admin role, the one that I use as example. Let me just search for it here. As you can see, global administrator. So this will grant you can manage all aspects of Microsoft Entra ID. Everything inside of Microsoft Entra ID, you'll be able to manage it with this role. So if I assign this global reader role to somebody, the person will not be able to do anything other than to just read information. Okay, so that is what we've got here, and that is what this diagram is showing here at this level. So what then happens when you want to start managing resources inside of Azure? Let me draw this line here to create a partition. Okay, so here you now have something called ARM, right? ARM, okay, which is Azure Resource Manager. So what this Azure Resource Manager does essentially is that it helps you to manage your Azure resources. So the architectural diagram is that resources do not just show inside of Azure. Microsoft do not just place resources around inside of Azure. They put resources inside of this ARM, right? So if you are looking for your virtual machine, it is inside of this ARM. If you are looking for your storage account, it is inside of this ARM. Whatever thing you want to look for is inside of this ARM, right? Because this ARM here is essentially an abstract concept that is used to manage resources. That is why it is called Azure Resource Manager. Okay, so what happens is that the traffic that is coming from outside here and hits the Entra ID, it gets authenticated and then authorized, right? So the traffic continues. If you now want to manage your resources, the traffic will then continues. It will come down here. It will pass this barrier here. It will come here and then hit this ARM here, which is your Azure Resource Manager. So when you open any resource, right, what you have essentially done is that you have entered inside of this Azure Resource Manager. For example, if I just come back here and then I just go back to home and I just click on storage accounts. So immediately I clicked into this storage account, yeah, I can create storage account, right? Immediately I start doing something on a particular resource inside of my Azure account. What essentially is happening is that I have gone inside of this Azure Resource Manager to start operating on the resources. Okay, so I have my virtual machine, I have my Azure storage, I have database, I have service bus, I have quite a lot of different things that is happening inside of this Azure Resource Manager. Okay, so how is this Azure Resource Manager related to authentication and authorization? Remember at the beginning of this tutorial, I mentioned that I am going to provide an explanation of differences in authorization levels, Right. So remember that there is an authorization that happens at this Entra ID scope. The authorization that happens here defines the type of activity that you can do inside of your Entra ID. Okay, whether you'll be able to manage people, whether you'll be able to manage people's passwords, whether you'll be able to manage and add another person to your account and things like that. What is happening here, it has nothing to do with your resources which you have inside of your Azure Resource Manager down here. Okay, so it doesn't matter even if you have your global administrator role here, which is coming from AD roles. It doesn't necessarily mean anything to resources inside of your Azure Resource Manager, because these roles here, they are all restricted to management of Entra ID. Okay, and that is what I have initially shown you. So if you come here, if you come back here and then click into Microsoft Entra ID, it is the AD roles, right? The roles that you have here, global admin, user administrator, essentially AD roles that will grant you the type of things that you can do inside of this Entra ID. So you can have your users, yeah, where you can manage the type of users that you have inside of your Entra ID. And as you can see inside of my own Entra ID, essentially inside of my own Azure account, I've got all these users here. Basically, majority, about 90% of these users are dummy users, right? I can do quite a lot of things. I can reset password of anyone that I want here because I have the global administrator role. Okay. So if I come back to the overview page, we can also see here I can handle groups. So if I click on groups, you can see here that I have got just 2 groups, right? So I've got 2 security groups essentially. So I'll just go back and then I'll come here, external identity. So this will grant me the feature to work on business to business identities. Maybe I am a business and I want to interact with other businesses to bring their users into my own Azure account or into my Entra ID. So this is where I will be essentially doing those configurations. Okay, so I have global administrator, which essentially means that I can do everything here inside of my Entra ID. Okay, look at it here: enterprise application, app registrations, everything down here, I can manage them, okay, without any restriction, because I have that highest level of role here, and that is coming at this scope here, at this scope that I have got here, this scope here. Okay, now if I want to now start managing the resources, right, remember that the traffic that is coming here will hit this Azure Resource Manager, and when it hits this Azure Resource Manager, right, I have another form of authorization that is happening here. Okay, so if I do AUTH, right, domain authorization, that is happening here, and this is where we have our RBAC roles, okay, which is role-based access control. Okay, this is now another level of authorization that is different from this place, from these AD roles. Okay, and what you essentially have here is this is what defines this RBAC here, is essentially what defines what you can do, right, on each of these resources that you've got here. So each of these resources here, right, they have their own roles. And the management of these roles is what you call RBAC, which is role-based access control, which is essentially different from AD roles. So when you click on storage account, for example, here, right, and you want to manage who can do what on this storage account. Say, for example, I am the owner of this storage account, then I have the owner role on this storage account, and then maybe another person inside of my Azure account, I want the person to not be able to do anything other than to just read. The person will not be able to delete it. The person will not be able to create or do anything. Then I can give the person a reader role here. Okay, so what I am essentially doing is that I am using this concept of RBAC to manage the security, the accessibility of my resource on this scope of storage account. Okay, so that is essentially what is happening with RBAC. Okay, so if I do Control A and then I redraw our Azure account, let me do it this way. I have my Azure account here. and then I have this guy here called Entra ID, right? So because this is one layer, I do it like this. This is one layer here, and the roles that you have inside of this layer is called the AD roles, right? That is where you see your global administrator, user administrator, all those type of things, right? Then I have another layer here, right, which essentially is the ARM, right, Azure Resource Manager, and that also has its own authentication, okay, which is called RBAC, right? So remember now that we've mentioned two places where authentication happens. Authentication happens at this particular stage where every traffic, before you even enter into our Azure account at all, it will firstly get authenticated and then get authorized. So when these two things happens, then traffic can flow into this arm, and then when it gets into this arm, then another authorization will happen here, which essentially checks whether the person, right, that owns this traffic that is coming in here, what type of activities that this traffic that is coming into this ARM, into this our resource manager can do on this virtual machine. What type of activity can the person do on storage account? What type of activity can the person do on database? What type of things, what type of action can this person do on database? What type of action can the person do here? What type of actions or activities can the person do here? So when you start thinking about this, essentially what you are doing is that you are taking total advantage of role-based access control to manage your resources. So now we've discussed about IAM, which is essentially an abstract concept that encompasses everything that we've been drawing out here, right? Which is identity and access management. And everything that we've been doing here is just identity and access management. So that is what IAM is overall. Okay. Then we have Entra ID, which is the gatekeeper. We can call it security man that sits at the entrance. Or maybe that is even the reason they call it Entra ID. I don't know, but that is just me thinking aloud. So the Entra ID sits here, right, at the entrance of our Azure account, that before you even come in, I want to authenticate you to confirm that you are who you are, and then I want to authorize you to see what you can do inside of this Entra ID. Okay, so when I am happy that you are who you claim to be, then I give you access into my Azure account. Then it comes down here to start using this RBAC to manage this, to manage the resources. Okay, so now how does traffic flows inside of this ARM? Well, this is now me going further to talk about the management architecture of Azure. So we have the subscription, we have the resource group, and then we have the, let me call this one RG, and then we have the resources. Okay, so before the subscription itself, we have another one called management group. Let me just call it MG, right? So from this Azure Resource Manager, traffic will go into this management group if you've created one, but essentially everyone will have a subscription. So I'll just terminate this management group here. So it will come here and go straight into subscription. When it hits the subscription, it will hit the resource group that your resource is inside, and then eventually it will come into the resource that you are trying to manage, right? So from this subscription to resource group to resources, all of these are essentially marked as resources. Okay, and you use your role-based access control to manage who can do what on each of these resources. Okay, so this is how traffic flows in Azure as related to authentication and authorization. Okay, however, this is where the confusion comes in for quite a lot of people. I'll just Control A everything and then bring it here, and then I will see if I can. Okay, so now this is where the confusion comes in for a lot of people, right? Because we have something called roles inheritance. So I want to now zoom this ARM section, which we have ARM here, right? Which is Azure Resource Manager, okay? Which is where all of our resources are placed. Okay, so here let us quickly understand the management architecture. Now, what happens is that how Azure manages or groups the infrastructure of everything that is happening inside of this ARM is that you have the subscription, you have the resource group, and then you have the resources. Let me just call this one RG. Before this subscription, we have something called management group, MG. Okay, so this is the layer, this is the architecture of how Microsoft builds Azure to manage the resources. We have the management group, we have the subscription, we have the resource group, and then we have the resources. Remember that I said everything that is happening here, right, is controlled by RBAC, role-based access control. And then I said we have something called role inheritance. Okay, so this essentially means that and we are working with Bob and John, right? If Bob has an owner role, right, at this subscription level, okay, that essentially means that Bob will have owner role at resource group level, and it will also have owner role on resource level. This is what we call role inheritance. So any resource group that belongs to this subscription, Bob will have an owner role on all of them. And any resource that belongs to any resource group inside of this subscription that Bob has owner role on, then Bob will also have the same owner role on such resource. Okay, so that is what we call role inheritance. If John, right, has an owner role on a resource group, let's say at this scope, John has an owner role here. Any resource that belongs to this resource group that John has an owner role on, John will also have an owner role on all of the resources that belong to that resource group. However, John will not have an owner role on the subscription because inheritance does not travel up, it travels down. Okay, so this is a very, very important aspect of inheritance and role-based access control management. I also want to quickly mention that each resource, right, has their own unique set of roles. If this is a virtual machine, VM, right, VM will have its own unique set of roles that you can assign to people to manage this VM. If this is a database will have its own unique set of roles. Now, even though each resource has their own unique set of roles, there are generic roles like the owner role, like the contributor role, like the reader role, right? So owner, contributor, and reader, they are generic to every resource. However, each resource will now have additional layer of roles. Okay, so let me quickly show you using a resource group. So if I come back to my Azure account, obviously this is still our Entra ID. So I want to leave the Entra ID now and then go into resource groups. So at this resource group, I have just one resource group. So if I click into it, here you will see I am. Okay, so if I click into this I am, and then I can see rows. If I click on these rows, you'll be able to see list of rows that I can assign to people. So if I grant this owner role to anybody now, that means that the person that I have granted this owner role will be able to manage this resource group, and the person would also be able to manage all the resources that are inside of this resource group, because roles use a travel down inheritance model, which I explained here, right? It uses a travel down inheritance model, what we can call a waterfall inheritance model. Okay, so if I grant a contributor role to the person will be able to have this contributor role on this resource group and also on all of the resources inside of this resource group. So I did mention something also about principal ID. Principal ID. So what essentially is principal ID? Principal ID, or let me just put say and call it principal IDs. Principal IDs are objects that you use to manage your Azure resources. So it could be users, it could be service principal. I'm going to explain all of these. It could be service principals, it could be groups, right? And it could be managed identities. Okay, so all of these, everything that we have here are what we call principal IDs in Azure. So we have users, we have service principals, we have groups, and then we have managed identities. Okay, so users essentially is just you and I, real human being, right? That that have password. Use real human beings that have username and passwords that you can use to log in into Azure. That is you and I. Okay, it could be Bob and John, right? So that's users. A user is an example of a principal ID. Again, we have service principal. Service principal is also a principal ID that we can use to programmatically sign into Azure and manage Azure or manage resources inside of Azure. So you create a service principal inside of Azure to programmatically manage Azure resources. Okay, so let me quickly just do this. Let me bring this guy here. And now let me just draw this other guy here. Now let's say this is our Azure account, right? Now we want to log into our Azure account. Now we want to do so programmatically. We don't want anybody sitting somewhere to come and log in into our Azure. We want systems, maybe computer, maybe phone. We want something to automatically log in into our Azure account, right? So this is where we have this service principal. This is a big use case of our service principal, because our service principal is an object that can log in into our Azure account and do quite a lot of different activities that we have instructed it to do. Okay, so service principal will come here. It doesn't matter if it's a service principal or a user. Authentication and authorization will also happen. So when that happens here, depending on the roles that we've given this service principal, right, it will be able to do its own thing at this level of authorization. And when it passes this level of authorization and then come into our ARM, right, and then it will also be able to use the role that we've assigned to this guy, to this service principal, to manage the resources here. So service principal is another example of a principal ID. Okay, now we have groups, right? Groups essentially is what we use to bring users together and then assign them a collective role. Say, for example, I have 500 people that I want to give the contributor role to be able to manage a virtual machine, right? So if I want to give 500 people a contributor role, it essentially means that I will be going through each of these people one after the other to assign them a contributor role. That is not very ideal, right? What I can do is that I will create a group. Let me call the group, create GP, call group. This is the group here. I'll call the group 500 people. Okay, so 500 people. Then what I will do is I will add all those 500 people inside of this group. Okay, and then I will assign the contributor role to this group. Okay, so this group will now essentially be a principal ID that has the role that can then pass down onto all of the people that are inside of this group. So essentially, if I now want to revoke this role from these 500 people, I just need to come to this group, okay? Come to this group and revoke the role from that group, and everybody inside of this group will not have that role again. Okay, so that is groups for you, and we can easily just see that here. So if I go back into my Azure account, come back into my Azure account here, let me quickly just show you groups. So if I go into Entra ID and then I click on groups, you can see here, it's loading. You can see here that I have two groups all together. Then I can again create another group here. I'll say the group is a security group because obviously this is not a Microsoft 365 group. And then I'll just call this one demo, and I would say demo also. Membership type, I will keep it as assigned. Now, this group wants me to assign member and also assign owners, right? But I won't do that. I'll just click on create. So if I refresh my account now, the group should now be 3. Okay, now we have 3 groups. If I click into these 3 groups, as you can see, we have this demo group here. If I click into that demo group, you can see that there's nobody inside of this group yet. Then I can come here to manage into members, and then I can add members into that group. So that's essentially what group is. So let me quickly show you a service principal. Okay, so if I click back into Microsoft ID, Microsoft Entra ID, sorry, and then I come into these app registrations. Okay, so essentially a service principal is an application, right, that you use to sign in into Azure. So you are using an app to sign in into another app. So if I come here now into app registrations, and then I can click on new app registrations, and then I can set the permission and all of those things here, and then I'll click on register. So when I click on register, I'll just come back here. When I click on register, it will create that service principal for us, and you see something like this, and then you see something like this. Okay, so essentially this is what you will get, and then you configure this guy here to be able to access your Azure. And that's essentially what a service principal is. So that is it, guys. That is how authentication and authorization happens inside of Azure. And I do hope that you find this video very useful. If you do, please give me a like, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and turn on the notification so that you'll be among the first people that will get notified whenever I drop videos like this.